They tell you that you are losing your mind. They whisper it in the hallways when they think you cannot hear, their voices dropping to that particular pitch people use when discussing someone who is broken beyond repair. They exchange those glances, those knowing looks across kitchen tables and living rooms and hospital waiting areas, looks that say she does not remember, she does not understand, she is gone. The pity in their eyes cuts deeper than any knife ever could. But here is what they do not know, what they cannot possibly understand, because they have already decided what story they want to believe. I remember everything. I remember the exact moment I realized my own son wanted to erase me from this world, wanted to lock me away in one of those places where old women go to die slowly, where my voice would become just another confused murmur echoing through sterile corridors that smell of disinfectant and despair, and the particular sweetness of decay that no amount of industrial cleaning can mask. I remember the taste of chamomile tea that morning, the way the steam curled up from the cup like reaching fingers trying to grasp something just out of reach, and I remember the slight hesitation in Daniel's hand as he placed it before me on the kitchen table where I had fed him breakfast every single morning of his childhood. That same table where he had done his homework while I helped him struggle through multiplication tables and spelling words. That same table where we had celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes I stayed up late decorating, where we had shared holiday meals and argued about curfews and laughed over inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else. That same table where his father and I had taught him about kindness and honesty and treating people with dignity. That table had witnessed 35 years of our lives together, had absorbed our tears and our laughter and our ordinary moments. And now it was witnessing the moment everything changed forever, the moment when the boy I raised revealed exactly how little my lessons had meant to him. The morning started like any other morning in the past 6 months, which is to say it started with me pretending. I woke up at 6:30 because my body still remembers the rhythm of a lifetime, still pulls me from sleep at the same time it has for 50 years, even though I no longer have anywhere I need to be, or anyone waiting for me to be there. The bed beside me was empty and cold, the way it has been empty and cold since Robert died 6 years ago, leaving me alone in a house that suddenly felt too big and too quiet and too full of memories that had no one left to share them with. I made my bed with hospital corners the way my mother taught me 70 years ago when I was just a little girl learning how to be a proper woman, back when proper mattered and corners had to be tight and everything had its place and its purpose. I brushed my teeth and washed my face and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, really looked at the woman staring back at me with eyes that have seen too much. 78 years old. Lines etched deep around my eyes and mouth like a map of everywhere life has taken me, everywhere pain has touched me, everywhere time has worn me down. Gray hair that I stopped coloring 2 years ago, because what was the point anymore when the only person who ever told me I looked beautiful was gone? Hands that shake whether I want them to or not. A tremor that started the day Robert's heart stopped beating and never went away, like some part of my nervous system broke when he died and could not figure out how to work properly anymore. But my eyes are still sharp, still clear, still capable of seeing the truth even when everyone around me wants to believe I am blind to it, still capable of recognizing danger when it walks through my front door wearing my son's face. I got dressed slowly, carefully, choosing clothes that made me look older and frailer than I actually felt. A cardigan that hung loose on my frame because I had lost weight on purpose over the past year. Skipping meals and eating like a bird whenever Daniel visited so he would see the weight loss and add it to his mental catalog of my decline. Slippers instead of real shoes because slippers suggested someone who had given up on going anywhere or doing anything meaningful. No makeup because women with dementia forget to care about their appearance, or so the stereotype goes, and I needed Daniel to see every stereotype confirmed. I practiced my trembling walk down the hallway, the slight shuffle that suggested unsteady legs and failing balance. I practiced the vacant expression I would wear when he arrived, the look of someone who is present, but not quite there, listening but not quite understanding. I had been practicing for 2 years and I had gotten very, very good at it. You know that feeling, do not you? That moment when you realize the person you brought into this world, the child you carried inside your body for 9 months feeling every flutter and kick and hiccup, the baby you nursed in the middle of the night when you were so exhausted you could barely keep your eyes open, the toddler whose first steps you celebrated with tears of joy, the boy whose scraped knees you bandaged and whose nightmares you chased away and whose tears you dried with gentle hands. and softer words, has looked at you and decided you are no longer a person, but a problem to be solved. Not a mother to be honored or cherished, or even tolerated with basic human decency. Just an obstacle, an inconvenience, a burden that needs to be removed so life can go on without you cluttering it up with your needs and your presence and your stubborn refusal to die quietly. I saw it in his eyes that Tuesday morning when he walked into my kitchen carrying a gym bag that had no business being there. Not love, not concern, not even pity, though pity would have been something at least, would have suggested he still saw me as human enough to feel sorry for. Just cold calculation, the kind of look you give a broken appliance you have been meaning to replace for months and have finally found the time to haul out to the curb. He had made me tea, which should have been my first warning because Daniel had not made me tea in 30 years, not since he moved out and started his life without me, the life where I became an obligation penciled into his calendar between business meetings and golf games with clients whose names I would never learn. I heard his car pull into the driveway at 7:45, earlier than usual. He typically did not visit before 9 on weekdays because he had important conference calls and urgent emails to handle first, because his time was valuable and mine was apparently infinite and worthless. But that Tuesday, he arrived early and he had that gym bag with him, black nylon with a zipper that looked heavy with whatever he had packed inside, and my stomach dropped when I saw it through the kitchen window because Daniel never brought luggage to my house, never stayed overnight, never planned to be here long enough to need a change of clothes. The gym bag meant something was different about this visit. The gym bag meant this was not a casual check-in on his declining mother. This was something planned, something prepared for, something that required supplies. He let himself in with the key I had given him years ago, back when I still trusted him completely, back when I thought family meant safety and blood meant loyalty, and my son would always be my son no matter what. "Good morning, Mother," he called out in that overly cheerful voice he used when he was pretending everything was fine, when he was performing normalcy like an actor who had not quite memorized his lines. I was in the kitchen already, sitting at the table with my own cup of coffee that I had made myself, waiting for him because I knew he was coming. I had known for 3 days that something was going to happen. He had called on Saturday, which was unusual because he normally only called on Sundays to fulfill his weekly obligation of checking in. He called to confirm he would visit Tuesday morning, and there was something in his tone that set off alarm bells in my mind. Alarm bells that have been ringing softly for months, but that morning were screaming, too casual, too friendly, too interested in making sure I would be home and alone. He asked me 3 different ways if anyone else would be there, asked if I had any appointments scheduled, asked if any friends were planning to visit, making sure, confirming, planning his execution. "I am making us some tea," he said, moving around my kitchen like he owned it, like this was his house, and I was just a guest he was accommodating out of the goodness of his heart. He opened cabinets and pulled out cups, my favorite cups with the little blue flowers that Robert had given me on our 20th anniversary. He filled the kettle with water and set it on the stove and waited for it to boil while making small talk about nothing, about the weather and traffic and some deal he was working on at the office that I was supposed to be too confused to understand. He was nervous. I could tell by the way his shoulders were too tight, hunched up near his ears like he was bracing for impact. I could tell by the way he kept glancing at me and then away, unable to hold eye contact for more than a second or two. I could tell by the way his hands moved just a fraction too quickly, too deliberately, like someone following a script they had rehearsed but were performing for the first time in front of an audience. My son was nervous about what he was planning to do to me, and that told me everything I needed to know about how wrong he knew it was. If he believed he was acting in my best interest, if he truly thought he was helping me, if he honestly felt this was the right thing to do, he would not have been nervous. He would have been confident, certain, calm. But guilt makes people anxious, and Daniel was drowning in guilt that morning, even though he was still going through with his plan anyway, because apparently his comfort mattered more than his conscience. My hands were shaking as I reached for the cup he placed in front of me. They shake all the time now, have been shaking for months. A tremor I cultivated carefully by tensing certain muscles and releasing others in a rhythm that looks exactly like the involuntary movements of someone losing control of their nervous system. Daniel noticed, of course. He notices everything that makes me seem weaker, everything that makes his case stronger, everything that proves to himself and anyone else who might question him that I am too far gone to function independently. The trembling fingers that drop things and struggle with buttons, the moments when I pause mid-sentence searching for a word that dances just out of reach, deliberately blanking on names and terms I know perfectly well. The times I have called him by his father's name, because their voices blend together in my memory, though in truth they sound nothing alike, and I know exactly who I am talking to every single time. The confused look I get on my face when he explains something simple, as if the concepts of time and money and basic logic have become too complex for my deteriorating mind to grasp. Daniel catalogs these moments like a prosecutor building a case, collecting evidence, constructing the narrative that will justify what he plans to do to me, what he has probably already started doing by talking to lawyers and doctors and filling out paperwork that will make me disappear. The kitchen was filled with morning light, the kind of golden glow that makes everything look softer and gentler than it actually is, the kind of light that hides flaws and smooths edges and makes you forget for a moment how sharp the world can be. I could see the dust motes floating in the air, thousands of tiny particles dancing in the sunbeams, and I thought about how Robert used to say those were fairy dust, and magic was real if you knew where to look for it. I could smell the chamomile mixing with something else, something bitter and medicinal that did not belong in tea, something chemical and wrong that made my nose wrinkle even though I kept my expression neutral. The scent was faint, almost undetectable beneath the floral sweetness of the chamomile, but it was there like a warning, like a whisper of danger. I have a sensitive nose, always have. It is one of those things about me that never changed even when I was busy changing everything else. When Daniel was a baby, I could smell a dirty diaper from 2 rooms away, could detect the sour milk smell of spit up before anyone else noticed it. When my husband was sick at the end, when the cancer was eating him from the inside out, I could smell it on him, could smell death approaching long before the doctors confirmed what I already knew. And that Tuesday morning, I could smell the chemicals Daniel had dissolved in my tea, could smell the wrongness of it even if I could not name exactly what it was, could smell my son's betrayal as clearly as I could smell the chamomile trying to hide it. Daniel stood by the counter, not looking at me directly, but watching me from the corner of his eye, the way a predator watches prey, waiting for the right moment to strike, measuring the distance and timing his approach. I understood in that crystalline moment of clarity that this was not an act of kindness. This was not a son trying to help his struggling mother. This was not love or concern or even misguided compassion. This was an act of violence wrapped in the pretense of care, dressed up in the language of what is best for you and you cannot take care of yourself anymore, and we have no choice. He had his own cup of tea in front of him, identical to mine in appearance. Same blue-flowered china, same golden amber liquid, same little wisp of steam rising from the surface. He was going through the motions of drinking it, raising it to his lips and taking small sips, making a show of sharing this morning ritual with me like we were 2 people having a pleasant conversation over tea instead of what we actually were. A son poisoning his mother and a mother watching it happen. But I noticed he was barely swallowing, noticed the way he held the liquid in his mouth for a moment before letting it go down his throat, like he was afraid to let too much of it into his system. Noticed that his cup was still almost full while mine sat waiting for me to drain it completely, waiting for me to trust him enough to drink poison from his hand. Before you judge me for what I did next, before you tell yourself that surely I was confused, that surely my son would never do something like that surely I misunderstood his intentions, or misread the situation, or let my paranoia get the better of me, I need you to understand something about Alzheimer's disease, that the doctors and the pamphlets and the well-meaning strangers who have never lived through it never tell you. Sometimes the disease does not steal your memories at all. Sometimes it sharpens them. Sometimes it strips away all the polite pretenses and social niceties that keep us from seeing the truth of who people really are. All the little lies we tell ourselves about family and love and the bonds that are supposed to be unbreakable. I have forgotten plenty of things over the past 2 years, or at least I have pretended to forget them. I forget where I put my reading glasses and then find them on top of my head or in the refrigerator or some other ridiculous place that makes Daniel shake his head and write another note in his mental file. I forget what day of the week it is and have to check the calendar on the wall 3 times before it sticks, asking the same question over and over like a broken record. I forget the names of my neighbors even though I have lived next to them for 15 years, calling them by wrong names, or just referring to them as the people next door. I forget the titles of movies I watched just last night, and the names of actors whose faces I recognize but cannot quite place, mixing up everyone until it all becomes a blur. I forget appointments and phone numbers and where I parked my car at the grocery store, wandering around the parking lot looking lost and helpless while Daniel sighs and takes my keys away bit by bit. But I have not forgotten how to read my son's face. I have not forgotten the lessons my mother taught me about trusting your instincts when something feels wrong, about listening to that little voice inside that knows danger when it sees it. I have not forgotten that a mother knows her child in ways that transcend words and logic and reason, knows them in her bones and her blood and her gut. And I have not forgotten that love does not drug your tea and call it mercy. I spent 9 months carrying Daniel inside my body, feeling him grow from a cluster of cells into a whole human being. I felt every movement, every hiccup, every shift in position as he turned and stretched in the limited space of my womb. I knew him before he knew himself, before he had a name or a face or any sense of who he would become. I studied his face for hours when he was an infant, memorizing every expression, learning to distinguish between his hungry cry and his tired cry, and his pain cry and his I just want to be held cry. I watched him grow from a helpless newborn who could not even lift his own head into a toddler taking his first wobbly steps, from a child asking endless questions about how the world works into a teenager testing boundaries and pushing limits, from a young man finding his way into the adult sitting across from me that morning with murder in his heart, if not his hands. I have seen him happy and sad and angry and scared and everything in between. I have seen him lie to teachers about homework and to friends about weekend plans and to his father about where he was going and who he was with. I have seen him tell the truth even when it cost him something. I have seen him at his best when he was kind and generous and thoughtful, and I have seen him at his worst when he was selfish and cruel and small. And I know, with the kind of certainty that comes from decades of observation and study, when my son is planning something he knows is wrong. The signs are all there if you know how to look for them. The avoidance of direct eye contact, because eyes tell truths that mouths try to hide. The forced casualness in his voice, pitching it just a little too high to sound natural. The way he talks too much about nothing to fill the silence, rambling about weather and traffic when normally he is economical with his words. The nervous energy that makes him move around the room unnecessarily, touching things and adjusting things that do not need adjusting. Daniel thought he was being subtle. He thought I was too far gone to notice these tells, too lost in confusion to see what was happening right in front of me. He was wrong. I saw everything. I always have. If you are watching this now, maybe you are living in that same house of suspicion, that same space between knowing something is wrong and being able to prove it to anyone who will listen. Maybe you have felt those same eyes on you, measuring your confusion, timing your decline, waiting for the moment when they can finally say she is too far gone now. We have no choice. We are doing this for her own good. Maybe you have wondered if you are the crazy one for thinking such terrible thoughts about your own family, for suspecting the people who are supposed to love you of wanting to get rid of you. Maybe you lie awake at night, questioning your own perception of reality, because they have told you so many times that you are unreliable, that your memory cannot be trusted, that you are seeing threats where none exist and imagining conspiracies that are not there. Maybe you have tried to tell someone, a friend or a doctor or another family member, and they looked at you with that same pitying expression and told you that your loved ones are just trying to help, that you should be grateful to have people who care enough to take care of you. I am here to tell you that you are not crazy. Your instincts are trying to save you. Listen to them. Trust yourself even when no one else will. Document everything, even if it feels paranoid. Protect yourself because no one else is going to do it for you. The tea sat before me, still steaming, and I wrapped my trembling hands around the cup, feeling its warmth seep into my cold fingers that are always cold now, no matter how much I try to warm them. Daniel had poured himself a cup too, I noticed. His sat on the counter near the sink, identical to mine in every way except one, the one that mattered. He had been so careful, so meticulous in his preparation, measuring out dosages and crushing pills and stirring until everything dissolved, or almost everything, because chemicals do not always cooperate the way you want them to. But he had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated me. He had believed his own narrative so completely, had convinced himself so thoroughly that I was lost in the fog of dementia, that he did not think I could possibly notice the tiny white residue at the bottom of my cup when I tilted it slightly in the light, catching the glint of undissolved powder settled against the porcelain. He did not think I would see it. He did not think I would understand what it meant. He did not think I would do anything about it, even if I did notice. He thought I was too far gone. He thought I was helpless. He thought wrong. I have spent 78 years on this earth learning how to survive in a world that has never been particularly kind to women, especially women who age past the point of being useful or decorative or easy to deal with. I have learned that survival sometimes requires you to pretend, to play the part they expect you to play, to become the confused old woman they have already decided you are. So I smiled at Daniel, that vague, gentle smile he has come to expect from me, the one that suggests I am listening but not quite processing, present but not quite engaged. I let my eyes go a little unfocused the way they do when I am performing my role, and I said, "What time is it, dear?" I seemed to have lost track, even though I could see the clock on the wall perfectly well and knew exactly what time it was. Daniel glanced at his watch, a Rolex that cost more than I spent on groceries in a year, probably more than I spent in several years. And in that brief moment when his attention shifted away from me and toward his expensive timepiece, I switched our cups, mine to the counter, his to my hands. It took less than 3 seconds, a smooth, practiced motion that looked like nothing more than an old woman shifting position in her chair, reaching for something, settling herself. He never even noticed. He was too busy checking the time and calculating how long it would take for the drugs to kick in, how long before I would start to get drowsy and confused and compliant. He was too busy congratulating himself on his clever plan. He was too busy to notice that the plan had just been turned against him. You need to understand how much I loved my son, love him still, even after everything, even though that love has curdled into something bitter and painful that sits in my chest like a stone. I carried him for 9 months, feeling every kick and hiccup and flutter, marveling at the miracle of creating life inside my own body. I held him seconds after he took his first breath, and I thought, this is what I was made for. This is what my whole life has been leading to. This perfect moment of meeting the person who would matter more to me than anyone or anything else ever could. I taught him to tie his shoes and ride a bicycle and treat people with kindness and dignity and respect. I sat up with him through illnesses and heartbreaks and disappointments. I worked 2 jobs after his father died to pay for his college education, scrubbing floors and waiting tables and doing whatever it took to make sure he had opportunities I never had. I believed I was raising a good man. I believed that goodness was something that could be taught and nurtured and grown like a garden if you just tended it carefully enough. I was wrong about that. Or maybe I was right, and somewhere along the way my son lost the goodness I tried so hard to cultivate in him, let it wither and die while I was not looking. Maybe his wife poisoned his heart against me with her constant complaints about how much of his time I took up and how much easier their lives would be if they did not have to worry about me. Maybe success made him cold, turned him into someone who measured everything by its return on investment and found me wanting. Maybe grief over his father's death twisted into resentment that I was still here taking up space in a world that had taken the parent he actually loved, the parent who taught him about sports and business and being a man in ways I never could. I do not know when or why or how it happened. I only know that the boy I raised would never have done what the man he became decided to do that morning. He sat down across from me at the table and watched me drink what he thought was poisoned tea, watched me with the focused attention of someone waiting for a show to start, waiting for the first signs that his plan was working. I took small sips, making soft, appreciative sounds, playing my role perfectly because I have had 2 years to practice, and I have gotten very good at being what people expect to see. The chamomile was actually quite good, floral and soothing, and I wondered if this was how he had practiced, making pot after pot until he got the flavor right, until he could mask the bitter chemical taste of whatever sedative he had crushed into powder and measured out so carefully. Such dedication, such careful planning, such attention to detail. He must have researched dosages, must have looked up my weight and age and calculated my tolerance based on whether I had ever taken benzodiazepines before. He must have figured out exactly how much it would take to make me compliant and manageable without killing me outright. because a dead mother brings police and investigations and complications, but a sedated mother who appears to have wandered away from home in confusion can be quietly institutionalized while the paperwork gets filed and the lawyers do whatever lawyers do. You do not just wake up one day and decide to drug your mother. This was premeditated. This was deliberate. This was the culmination of weeks, or maybe months of planning and preparation, and convincing himself that what he was about to do was justified. We sat in silence for a while, him watching me over the rim of his coffee cup, while I watched him back and wondered how long it would take. The drugs in his system, I mean. The sedatives that were supposed to render me helpless. How long before he started to feel the first effects creeping through his bloodstream and into his brain? How long before he realized that something was wrong, that this was not going according to plan? How long before he understood what had happened and knew with absolute certainty that I had outsmarted him? I did not know exactly what he had put in that tea, but I knew it would not be gentle. You cannot slip someone a medication strong enough to render them helpless for transport to an institution and have it be a pleasant experience. There would be dizziness, confusion, loss of motor control, all the things he had accused me of experiencing naturally through the progression of Alzheimer's disease, he was about to experience artificially through his own choices. There is a certain poetry in that, do not you think? A certain justice in watching someone suffer the exact fate they tried to inflict on you. I need to pause here and ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer before you respond, because this matters more than you might realize. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you ever been in a room full of people who are talking about you like you are not even there, making decisions about your future without asking what you want, treating you like a problem that needs managing instead of a person who deserves respect and autonomy and the basic human dignity of being consulted about your own existence? Have you ever tried to speak up only to be dismissed or patronized or told that you are confused and do not understand what is best for you? Have you ever felt the cold horror of realizing that the people who claim to love you have decided your voice does not matter anymore? If you have ever felt that way, if you have ever been dismissed or diminished or made to feel like your thoughts and feelings and preferences are irrelevant because someone else has decided they know better, I need you to do something for me right now. I need you to go to the comments section below this video and write these 7 words exactly as I say them. I see you, and you are not alone. That is it. Just those 7 words. I see you, and you are not alone. Write it for yourself as an affirmation that your experience is real and valid. Write it for everyone else who is watching this and feeling the same way, who needs to know they are not the only one going through this. Because when we speak these truths out loud, when we acknowledge what is happening to us and to each other, when we break the silence that lets abuse flourish in the shadows, we take back some of the power that others have tried to steal from us. Your comment might be the thing that makes someone else realize they are not crazy. They are not imagining things. They are not overreacting to normal family dynamics. Your comment might validate someone's reality when everyone else is gaslighting them. Your comment might save someone's life today or tomorrow or next week just by letting them know they are not alone. So please, pause this video right now and go write, "I see you and you are not alone" in the comments. Help us build a community where people like us do not have to suffer in silence anymore, where we can speak our truth without fear of being dismissed or institutionalized or drugged into submission. Let your voice be heard while you still have one. Let it matter while it still can. Do it now. I will wait right here for you. Thank you. Thank you for adding your voice to this chorus of survivors and fighters and people who refuse to go quietly. Now let me tell you what happened next in my kitchen that Tuesday morning. Daniel's hand started to shake. Just a little tremor at first, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. The kind of shake you might attribute to too much coffee or not enough sleep or nerves about a big presentation at work. But I noticed because I know what that shake looks like. I live with it every day, or at least I pretend to live with it every day as part of my performance. I have studied the tremor in my own hands so carefully that I can spot it in anyone else. He set down his coffee cup a bit too hard, and it clattered against the saucer, the sound sharp and loud in the quiet kitchen. His eyes widened slightly, just a fraction, but enough for me to see the first flicker of confusion cross his face. Something is wrong, I could see him thinking. Something is not going according to plan. His carefully constructed timeline was starting to fall apart. He stood up abruptly, too quickly, and the chair scraped against the floor. He swayed just a little, caught himself on the back of the chair, his knuckles going white as he gripped it for support. "Mother," he said, and his voice had changed, had lost that controlled quality, and taken on an edge of panic that he was trying very hard to hide. "I do not feel well. I should have felt triumph in that moment. I should have felt vindicated and powerful and righteous. But instead, I just felt sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that my own child had forced me to choose between his well-being and my freedom. Sad that love had twisted into something so ugly that we were sitting in my kitchen poisoning each other over breakfast like characters in a Greek tragedy. Sad that this was what family had become for us, this dance of deception and betrayal and violence dressed up as care." He took a step toward me, and his legs gave out. He went down hard, knees hitting the floor with a thud that made me wince even though part of me wanted to feel nothing at all. I watched him struggle to understand what was happening to his body, watched the confusion spread across his face as his muscles stopped obeying his commands, and his thoughts started to scatter. The confusion in his eyes was genuine. The fear was real. And I sat there drinking my chamomile tea and feeling nothing but a deep and terrible emptiness. A void where maternal love should have been, but had been replaced by cold necessity. You need to understand that I am not a cruel person by nature. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I spent my whole life trying to be good, trying to be kind, trying to do the right thing even when the right thing was hard or painful or cost me something I wanted to keep. But there comes a point where being good means standing up for yourself, where being kind to others requires you to stop being cruel to yourself by allowing them to destroy you, where doing the right thing means refusing to be a victim, even if that makes you look like a villain. Daniel had chosen violence first when he decided my life was worth less than his convenience. He had made his choice, and now he was experiencing the consequences of that choice. Was I supposed to feel guilty about that? Was I supposed to sacrifice myself on the altar of maternal love and go quietly into whatever institution he had selected for me? Was I supposed to let him win just because he was my son, and I had once loved him more than life itself? I think not. "Help me," he said, his words slurring together like melting ice cream, the syllables running into each other until they barely made sense. "Please." And the irony was so thick I almost laughed, except there was nothing funny about any of this. Here was my son, the man who had planned to render me helpless, begging me for help as the drugs he had intended for me flooded his system and shut down his motor functions one by one. Here was the person who had decided I was too confused to manage my own life, experiencing the very confusion he had wanted to inflict on me. The universe has a dark sense of humor sometimes, a twisted sense of justice that turns weapons back on those who wield them. Daniel crawled toward me, his movements uncoordinated and desperate, his breathing labored as his respiratory system started to slow down. "What did you do?" he managed to ask, and I could hear the realization dawning in his voice like a terrible sunrise. "What did you do to me?" "I switched our cups," I told him simply, my voice perfectly calm and steady and clear. "While you were checking the time, you were so sure I was too far gone to notice what you were doing. You believed your own story so completely that you stopped being careful. You thought I was lost in dementia, and you could do whatever you wanted to me without consequences. That was your mistake, Daniel. You underestimated me. You thought I was weak, but I was just waiting. You thought I was confused, but I was just watching. You thought you had already won, but the game was not over yet." He tried to speak, but the words would not come anymore, his tongue too thick and heavy in his mouth, his thoughts too scattered to form coherent sentences. His eyes rolled back and his body went slack against the kitchen floor, collapsing like a puppet with cut strings. I sat there for a long moment looking at my son, my baby, my greatest achievement, and my deepest disappointment, and I wondered if I had just killed him. I wondered if I cared. The answer to both questions was complicated. Then I picked up the phone and called 911 like the concerned mother I was supposed to be. "My son has collapsed," I told the operator, my voice perfectly calm and perfectly rational, every word enunciated clearly without a trace of the confusion or agitation that supposedly characterized my mental state. "I think he may have taken something. Please send an ambulance right away." The operator asked questions and I answered them all with the kind of coherent precision that would have surprised Daniel if he had been conscious to hear it. "No, I did not see him take anything, but there is an empty bottle of pills on the counter that I just noticed. Yes, he had been acting strangely this morning, more nervous than usual. No, I did not know what kind of pills they were, but I could try to read the label if that would help. Yes, I would stay on the line until help arrived. I gave her the address slowly and clearly. I confirmed the cross streets. I described his symptoms in medical detail. I was the picture of a concerned elderly mother dealing with a crisis as competently as any younger person would. I was believable. I was sympathetic. I was perfect. And somewhere in the back of my mind I was thinking about that gym bag he had brought with him, wondering what was inside it, knowing I would need to check before the paramedics arrived. While I was still on the phone with the operator, I walked over to where Daniel had dropped the gym bag and unzipped it with one hand. Inside, I found exactly what I expected to find, and somehow it still made my stomach drop. Clothes for me, comfortable shoes and loose pants and a cardigan, the kind of outfit someone would wear to a long car ride, a bottle of water, some crackers in case I got hungry, and paperwork. So much paperwork. Admission forms for Shady Brook Manor already filled out and signed with what looked like my signature, though I had never seen these documents before in my life. A medical power of attorney giving Daniel complete control over my healthcare decisions. Incompetency evaluations from doctors I had seen during my performed decline, doctors who had examined me while I deliberately failed their tests, and confirmed what Daniel wanted them to confirm. Everything he needed to have me committed against my will. Everything he needed to make me disappear legally and completely. I took photos of everything with my phone before zipping the bag closed again and placing it back where he had dropped it. The paramedics arrived within 7 minutes, bursting through my front door with their equipment and their urgency and their professional concern. They found Daniel on the kitchen floor, and me sitting calmly at the table, still holding my cup of tea with the phone in my other hand. I told them everything they needed to know, and nothing they did not. My son came to visit me this morning, like he does every Tuesday. We were having tea together and talking about his work. He said he was not feeling well all of a sudden. He stood up and collapsed. I called you immediately. They checked his vitals and called out numbers to each other in their medical shorthand. They loaded him onto a stretcher with practice deficiency. They asked me if I wanted to ride with them to the hospital. I told them no thank you. I would drive myself shortly. I just needed a moment to collect myself first because this had all been such a terrible shock. They understood completely. Of course they understood. I was an elderly woman in shock dealing with a medical emergency. I needed time to process what had happened. They told me which hospital they were taking him to, and they asked if there was anyone they should call for me, and I said I would call my family myself. They left with their sirens wailing and my son unconscious in the back of their ambulance, and I stood in my doorway waving goodbye like a confused old woman watching her whole world fall apart. I sat in the sudden silence of my kitchen and finished my tea, every last drop. Then I washed both cups carefully and put them away in the cabinet where they belonged. I wiped down the counters with bleach. I made sure there was no evidence of anything unusual, nothing that would make anyone ask uncomfortable questions. Just a normal morning, just a regular Tuesday, just a mother and son having tea before one of them inexplicably fell ill for reasons no one could quite explain. I found Daniel's phone on the counter where he had left it, and I scrolled through his messages, and what I found there confirmed everything I had suspected and feared. There were texts to his wife, messages that made my blood run cold even though I had known something like this was coming. "The plan is in motion," one of them said, sent from him to her at 6:30 that morning. "By this afternoon she will be admitted, and we can start the process." Another message from the night before said I already have the power of attorney paperwork ready to file first thing tomorrow, and another from 2 weeks ago that said, "Do not worry, she will not even remember fighting it. The doctors all agree she is too far gone to contest anything." They had it all planned out, every detail, every contingency, every step from drugging me to transporting me to institutionalizing me to taking control of my assets. Everything except the possibility that I might fight back. Everything except the chance that I might be smarter than they gave me credit for. I deleted those messages, all of them. Every single incriminating text between Daniel and his wife, between Daniel and lawyers, between Daniel and the administration at Shady Brook Manor. I wiped them from his phone completely, and then I cleared the deleted items folder so they could not be recovered. Then I looked through his recent calls and I found the number for Shady Brook Manor listed there 6 times in the past 2 weeks. Arrangements had been made, a room had been reserved, papers had been prepared, payment had been discussed and agreed upon. All that was missing was my drugged and compliant body being delivered into their custody like a package that needed to be stored somewhere out of the way. I wondered what story Daniel had told them about me. I wondered what lies he had spun to convince them that I needed to be locked away behind their gates. I wondered if anyone at that facility had bothered to ask if I wanted to be there, or if they simply accepted payment and asked no questions as long as the checks cleared. I should tell you about Shady Brook Manor because it is important that you understand what Daniel had planned for me, where he intended to put me, and why I fought so hard to avoid that fate. It is not one of those nice facilities they show in the brochures, the ones with gardens and art therapy, and kind staff members who treat residents with dignity and respect. Shady Brook is where families put relatives they want to forget about. It is where people go to disappear from the world. The reviews online are horrifying if you know where to look. If you dig past the first page of results that shows the carefully curated positive testimonials and find the real stories from people who got out or whose family members never did. Patients left in soiled bedding for hours because there is not enough staff, or the staff does not care enough to check on anyone who is not actively screaming. Medications used as chemical restraints to keep difficult residents quiet and manageable, rather than treating any actual medical condition. Visitors turned away at the door because it is not a good time, or the resident is having a difficult day, or we think it would be better if you called ahead next time. Called ahead so we can make sure your loved one is sedated enough not to tell you what is really happening here. It is a place designed to warehouse human beings until they die, and Daniel had chosen it specifically because it was the kind of place where no one would listen if I tried to tell them I did not belong there. It was the kind of place where my protests would be dismissed as delusions, and my clarity would be interpreted as manipulation, and my sanity would be questioned no matter how coherently I spoke. It was the kind of place where I would lose my voice entirely. The hospital called me 2 hours later to update me on Daniel's condition. He was stable, but unconscious. They were running tests. They had found high levels of benzodiazepines in his system, specifically lorazepam, which is used to treat anxiety, but can be dangerous in high doses. Did I know if he had been taking anything for anxiety or insomnia? Did he have a prescription for this medication? Had he seemed depressed or suicidal lately? I told them no, not to my knowledge. He had seemed perfectly fine this morning, perhaps a bit stressed about work, but nothing that would suggest he was considering harming himself. I told them I was very worried about him, that this was completely out of character, that I could not imagine what would drive him to do something like this. I told them I would be there as soon as I could manage, as soon as I felt steady enough to drive. They said, "Take your time. There is no rush. He is being well cared for." Then I got dressed in my best outfit, the navy blue dress I wore to church and to funerals, the one that made me look like a respectable elderly woman who would never dream of poisoning her own son. I put on real shoes instead of slippers. I did my hair and put on a little bit of makeup, just enough to look like I was holding myself together through a crisis. And I drove myself to the hospital with steady hands and a clear mind and a story that would hold up under scrutiny. The emergency room doctor was young, probably younger than Daniel, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that suggested he still believed in the goodness of people. He explained the situation to me using simple terms, speaking slowly and clearly, like I might not understand big words or complex medical concepts. "Your son has ingested a significant amount of benzodiazepines," he said. "We are not sure if this was intentional or accidental, but we have to treat it as a possible suicide attempt until we know otherwise." I let my face crumple with worry and shock. I let my hands shake just a little more than usual. I let tears gather in my eyes without actually falling, because that would have been too much. "Oh my goodness," I said, my voice breaking at exactly the right moment. "He has been so stressed lately with his work and his marriage. I have been so worried about him, but I never imagined he would do something like this." The doctor patted my hand in a gesture meant to be comforting. "We are going to keep him for observation," he said. "We have contacted psychiatric services because any overdose requires a mental health evaluation before discharge." I nodded, like this made perfect sense, like this was a reasonable and expected response to the situation. "Of course," I said. "Whatever he needs, whatever will help him. I am just so grateful he is alive." When they finally let me see Daniel several hours later, he was awake, but groggy, his eyes unfocused and his movements sluggish, restrained to the hospital bed with soft cuffs on both wrists. Not because he was violent or aggressive, but because that is standard protocol when someone comes in with a suspected intentional overdose. When there is concern they might try to hurt themselves again if given the opportunity. His eyes found mine, and I saw recognition flare in them like a match struck in darkness. I saw understanding dawn across his face. I saw rage and betrayal, and impotent fury. But when he tried to speak, when he tried to tell the nurse standing beside his bed what had really happened, the words came out garbled and confused and incoherent. He tried to say. She did this. She switched the cups. She poisoned me. But it sounded like gibberish to anyone who did not know what he was trying to communicate. It sounded exactly like what you would expect from someone who had overdosed on sedatives and was now experiencing the psychological and neurological aftermath of that trauma. His brain was still foggy from the drugs, and his tongue would not cooperate, and his thoughts kept slipping away before he could hold on to them long enough to articulate them properly. I sat beside his bed and held his restrained hand, and I looked into his eyes while I spoke to the nurse in my clear, calm, rational voice. He has not been himself lately, I said sadly, letting just the right amount of worry and maternal concern color my words. So much pressure at work, so much responsibility. Sometimes I think he resents having to take care of me on top of everything else, having to manage my decline while also managing his career and his family. It must be such a burden for him. The nurse made sympathetic sounds and wrote something down on her clipboard. It must be so hard for you too, she said, having to worry about your son like this when you have your own health challenges to deal with. I nodded and let a single tear roll down my cheek, just one because more would have seemed performative. I just want him to get the help he needs, I whispered, my voice trembling in exactly the right way. I cannot lose him. He is all I have left in this world. Daniel made a sound of protest, but it came out as an incoherent moan, a noise that could have meant anything or nothing. The nurse adjusted his IV and told me the psychiatric team would be by shortly to do a full evaluation and determine what kind of treatment he would need going forward. Do you understand what I had done? Do you see the beautiful, terrible symmetry of it? The way justice sometimes circles back on itself? Daniel had planned to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized against my will. He had prepared documents and made arrangements and calculated dosages, all with the goal of taking away my freedom and my autonomy and my voice. But now he was the one in the hospital bed, restrained and incoherent, with a psychiatric hold on his record that would follow him for years. He was the one who would be evaluated and questioned and doubted. He was the one whose grip on reality would be called into question every time he tried to tell anyone what had actually happened. And every time he tried to tell the truth, every time he tried to explain that his mother with Alzheimer's disease had somehow outsmarted him and poisoned him with his own drugs, he sounded more unstable and more paranoid and more delusional. Because how crazy does it sound to claim that your elderly mother, who can barely remember what day it is, managed to switch your cups without you noticing and dose you with sedatives you were planning to use on her? How paranoid and unhinged does that make you appear to doctors and nurses and psychiatrists who have no context for the complex game we were playing? The more desperately he insisted I had done this to him, the more convinced everyone became that he was having some kind of psychotic break brought on by the stress of caregiving and the guilt of whatever he had been planning. The psychiatrist who came to evaluate him was a tired-looking woman in her 50s with glasses and a clipboard and an air of having seen everything and being surprised by nothing. She sat beside his bed and asked him questions in that calm, professional tone they teach you in medical school, the tone that suggests nothing you say can shock or disturb me. Can you tell me what happened this morning? Do you remember taking anything? Have you been feeling depressed or anxious? Have you had thoughts of harming yourself? Daniel tried to tell her. He really did try to explain what had happened, to make her understand that this was not a suicide attempt but a failed murder attempt that had been turned around on him. But between the drugs still clouding his system and the sheer implausibility of his story, and the way I sat there looking like a confused, worried mother who just wanted her son to get better, he did not stand a chance. Every word out of his mouth made him sound less credible. Every insistence that I had poisoned him made him seem more paranoid and detached from reality. And when he started getting agitated, when his voice rose and his heart rate monitor started beeping faster, and the nurse made a concerned note on her chart, they sedated him again for his own safety and the safety of the staff. Just a mild sedative to help him calm down and rest. Just something to take the edge off his anxiety. Just enough to keep him quiet for a while longer. I stayed at the hospital for 3 more hours after that. I played my role flawlessly, never breaking character for even a moment. I cried at appropriate moments. I asked concerned questions about prognosis and treatment options. I made sure every nurse and doctor and orderly who saw me would remember a sweet elderly woman devastated by her son's apparent suicide attempt, a mother whose love for her troubled child was obvious and touching. Then I went home and I slept better than I had in months, maybe better than I had slept since Robert died, and I started living in a house that echoed with absence. I slept the sleep of someone who had faced a threat and survived it, someone who had been pushed to the edge and pushed back harder. The next morning, the hospital called to tell me they were transferring Daniel to a psychiatric facility for a mandatory 72-hour hold. Standard procedure, they assured me, for anyone who comes in with a suspected suicide attempt. Nothing to worry about, just to make sure he was stable and safe and not a danger to himself before releasing him back into the world. They asked if I knew which facility I would prefer, and I pretended to think about it for a moment before suggesting Shady Brook Manor. After all, I said, I have heard they are very good with people who are struggling with mental health issues. I have heard they have excellent programs and caring staff. I have heard they really know how to help people get back on their feet. The administrator I spoke to agreed that Shady Brook had a good reputation and said they would make the arrangements. And I hung up the phone and smiled, because the irony was almost too perfect to be real. My son, who had planned to imprison me in Shady Brook Manor, was now being admitted there himself. The room that had been reserved for me, paid for with money from my own accounts that Daniel had slowly been siphoning away under the guise of helping me manage my finances, would now hold him instead. The staff who had been prepared to dismiss my protests as dementia-driven confusion would now be dismissing his protests as evidence of his unstable mental state. The doctors who had been ready to medicate me into compliance would now be medicating him. The locked doors that were supposed to keep me from escaping would now be keeping him in. Every system he had planned to use against me was now being used against him. Every trap he had set was now sprung with him inside it. Every weapon he had prepared was now pointed in his direction. I had not planned for it to work out this perfectly. I had only wanted to avoid being institutionalized myself. But sometimes the universe gives you more than you asked for. Sometimes justice aligns in ways you could never have orchestrated on your own. If you have been watching this video and feeling like something has been building inside you, some recognition or validation or permission to feel what you have been feeling, I want you to know that this channel exists for you. This is not just entertainment. This is not just a story to pass the time. This is a space where we tell the truths that no one else wants to hear, where we speak the unspoken things, where we acknowledge the darkness that lurks in families and relationships and systems that are supposed to protect us, but sometimes become the greatest threats we face. I share these stories because I know there are others out there who need to hear them, others who need to know they are not alone in their struggles and their fears and their quiet, desperate acts of survival. When you subscribe to this channel, you are joining a community of people who understand what it means to fight for your life against people who are supposed to love you. You are joining a family of survivors who refuse to be victims anymore. Subscribe now so you never miss a story. Click that notification bell so you know the moment a new video goes live. Leave a like if this resonated with you, if you saw yourself in my story, if you felt understood in a way you rarely feel understood. And share this with anyone who might need to hear it, anyone who might be fighting their own battle against family members or systems or circumstances that want to erase them. Together, we are stronger than they want us to be. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this community where we refuse to be silent about the things that happen in the shadows, where we speak truth to power even when our voices shake, where we fight for our right to exist on our own terms. Subscribe if you have not already. Like this video. Comment your thoughts and your own stories if you feel safe doing so. Share it with others who might benefit from knowing they are not alone. And remember, you are stronger than anyone who underestimates you will ever know. Until next time, keep fighting, keep surviving, keep winning. You deserve your freedom and your voice in your life, and anyone who tries to take those things from you has underestimated what you are capable of when you are backed into a corner with nothing left to lose.